Cuban Americans are Americans who trace their ancestry to Cuba. The word may refer to someone born in the U.S. of Cuban descent or to someone who has emigrated to the U.S. from Cuba. Cuban Americans are the third largest Latino American group in the United States. Many communities throughout the United States have significant Cuban American populations. Florida, Texas and New York. South Florida is followed by New York City, Tampa, Florida, Union County and North Hudson, New Jersey areas, particularly Union City, Elizabeth, West New York, and Houston, Texas. With a population of 141,250. The New York metropolitan area's Cuban community is the largest outside Florida. Nearly 70% of all Cuban Americans live in Florida. Before the Louisiana Purchase and the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, Spanish Florida and other possessions of Spain on the Gulf Coast west of the Mississippi River were provinces of the Captaincy General of Cuba. Consequently, Cuban immigration to regions that would eventually form the United States have a long history. Beginning in the Spanish colonial period in 1565 when the settlement of St. Augustine was established by Pedro Menéndez de Avilés, and hundreds of Spanish soldiers and their families moved from Cuba to St. Augustine to establish new lives. Thousands of Cuban settlers also immigrated to Louisiana between 1778 and 1802 and Texas during the period of Spanish rule. Since 1820, the Cuban presence was more than 1,000 people. In 1870, the number of Cuban immigrants increased to almost 12,000, of which about 4,500 resided in New York City, about 3,000 in New Orleans and 2,000 in Key West. The causes of these movements were both economic and political, which intensified after 1860, when political factors played the predominant role in emigration. As a result of deteriorating relations with the Spanish metropolis, 1869 marked the beginning of one of the most significant periods of emigration from Cuba to the United States, again centered on Key West. The exodus of hundreds of workers and businessmen was linked to the manufacture of tobacco. The reasons are many: the introduction of more modern techniques of elaboration of snuff, the most direct access to its main market, the United States, the uncertainty about the future of the island, which had suffered years of economic, political and social unrest during the beginning of the 10 Years' War against Spanish rule. It was an exodus of skilled workers, precisely the class in the island that had succeeded in establishing a free labor sector amid a slave economy. The manufacture of snuff by the Cuban labor force became the most important source of income for Key West between 1869 and 1900. Tampa was added to such efforts, with a strong migration of Cubans, which went from 720 inhabitants in 1880 to 5,532 in 1890. However, the second half of the 1890s marked the decline of the Cuban immigrant population, as an important part of it returned to the island to fight for independence. The war accentuated Cuban immigrant integration into American society, whose numbers were significant, more than 12,000 people. In the mid to late 19th century, several cigar manufacturers moved their operations to Key West to get away from growing liberal and political problems. Many Cuban cigar workers followed. The Cuban government had even established a grammar school in Key West to help preserve Cuban culture. There, children learned folk songs and patriotic hymns such as L'Urbaya Mesa, the Cuban national anthem. In 1885, Vicente Martinez Ibo moved his cigar operations from Key West to the town of Tampa, Florida to escape labor strife. Ibo City was designed as a modified company town, and it quickly attracted thousands of Cuban workers from Key West and Cuba. West Tampa, another new cigar manufacturing community, was founded nearby in 1892 and also grew quickly. Between these communities, the Tampa Bay area's Cuban population grew from almost nothing to the largest in Florida in just over a decade, and the city as a whole grew from a village of approximately 1,000 residents in 1885 to over 16,000 By 1900, both Ybor City and West Tampa were instrumental in Cuba's eventual independence. Inspired by revolutionaries such as José Martí, who visited Florida several times, Tampa area Cubans and their sympathetic neighbors donated money, equipment, and sometimes their lives to the cause of Cuba Libre. After the Spanish-American War, some Cubans returned to their native land, but many chose to stay in the U.S. due to the physical and economic devastation caused by years of fighting on the island. Several other small waves of Cuban emigration to the U.S. occurred in the early 20th century. Most settled in Florida and the Northeast U.S., the majority of an estimated 100,000 Cubans arriving in that time period usually came for economic reasons, but included anti-Batista refugees fleeing the military dictatorship, which had pro-U.S. diplomatic ties. During the 20s and 30s,